Welcome to another video from McFatter Tech Musser. If you like these videos, please click subscribe. 70-741 Lab 4, Installing and Configuring DHCP. In this lab, we're going to be creating a DHCP version 4 scope. We're going to be creating a DHCP version 6 scope. We'll look at creating and configuring a Superscope, as well as creating and configuring multicast scopes, and we'll also take a look at creating DHCP reservations as well as DHCP policies. So let's go ahead and get this started. We're going to be working with our DC1 domain controller. That's all we're going to use in this. In our first exercise, we'll be creating an IPv4 DHCP scope. Understand that a scope is a range of IP addresses that a DHCP server uses to supply clients on a particular subnet with IP addresses. In this exercise, we'll create a scope for IPv4 addresses on your DHCP server. A DHCP scope, it's a range of IP addresses on a selected subnet that are selected for allocation by a DHCP server. After you install the DHCP role, you can then create a scope using the DHCP snap-in from Microsoft Management Console, or MMC. We've used this many times. So we're already logged into our DC1, so let's go ahead and where do we manage all the installed roles and features? Well, principally from Tools in Server Manager. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on that. We're going to go down to DHCP. We're going to left click and select that. I'm going to make this window a little bit larger, make it easier for us to view. Move our panes a little bit. In here, we're going to go ahead, we're going to select our server. We're going to expand the IPv4 node. Now, we can see that we already do have our principal scope created, but we're going to create a new one. So we're going to right click on IPv4 and select New Scope. In our wizard, we'll click Next, and let's name this scope Corporate Office. We'll go ahead and we'll click Next, and it says, what range do you want to assign? Well, we're going to use 10.0.0.1, and we'll end with 10.0.0.100. Now, let's answer our first question. You'll notice that the wizard automatically adds a value to the subnet mask text box. Where did that value come from? Well, what type of address range is a 10.0.0.1 address fall into? If we typed in 192.168.1.1, what type of address would that fall into? The wizard calculates the subnet mask value based on the value of the start and end addresses you supply for the scope. An address with 10 at the start of the first octet is a Class A address, and the Class A subnet mask is 255.0.0.0, so our seeder length is 8. You could modify either to get your proper subnet length. We're going to modify this to 255.255.255.0. So we're going to take a Class A address space and we're going to utilize it in a Class C. Once you've done that, you can click Next. Now, we're going to exclude some addresses. Perhaps we've got those IPs that are available from the .1 to the .100, but we want to exclude a number because we're going to set static IPs. We're going to type in 10.0.0.1, and for ending address, we're going to type in 10.0.0.10 and click Add. Now, let's answer our second question. And I already gave you the answer to it. Why is it necessary to exclude addresses from the range of addresses included in the scope? Well, perhaps you need some static IP addresses. Maybe the DHCP server itself is included in this. It's got a static IP address. You wouldn't want to accidentally hand out an address that's already been assigned, right? Excluding those addresses from the scope enables you to assign them manually. With that, let's answer our third question. How would it be possible to leave that 10.0.0.1 address as part of the scope and still use it for our supposed DHCP server? Well, we're going to look at that later on in our lesson. We can use an address in the scope for the DHCP server by creating a reservation. And this permanently assigns it utilizing the server's MAC address. With that, let's go ahead and click Next. Now, lease duration. This is our fourth question. And our fourth question is, what is the default lease duration? Well, you can see it's right there, 8 days. If I take that highlight away, maybe it's a little bit easier to see. 8 is the default number of days for lease duration. Understand that at 50% of that duration, your client's going to want to try to contact the DHCP server to renew its lease automatically. We're going to go ahead, we're going to click Next. And now we're at the stage where we can configure some DHCP options. So we say, yep, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Next. And we're going to specify a router, our default gateway. Remember, you can have many addresses, but you can only have one default gateway. We're going to type in 10.0.0.1 and click Add. We'll click Next. And under DHCP domain name and DNS server, it's already populated our domain name and our DNS server. It knows that, it understands that because we've integrated with Active Directory. We're going to click Next. Under Win servers, we'll leave that empty and click Next. Under the Activate the Scope Now, yes, we will. We're going to click Next. And once we click Finish, I would like my students to go ahead and take a screenshot, and they're going to paste their results into step number 17 in their worksheet. Let's go ahead and we're going to expand that corporate scope. Let's take another screenshot and paste that into step number 19. All right, we're moving on. We've completed our first exercise of creating an IPv4 scope. Now, in our second exercise, we'll create an IPv6 scope. In this exercise, we will create a DHCP scope to allocate IPv6 addresses to the computers on your network. Like IPv4 addresses, IPv6 addresses are divided into network bits and host addresses. In addition, IPv6 supports automatic configuration. However, with a Windows DHCP server, you can also configure stateful address configurations. So still in our DHCP console, we're going to select that IPv6 node and then expand it and right-click and say New Scope. In that New Scope wizard, we're going to click Next, and we're going to use that same name, Corporate Office. So we'll go ahead and we'll get that typed in. And click Next. Now let me just go back. Did I type that correctly? Yes, I did. Okay. Now, a little bit different setup for IPv6. For our prefix length, we're going to type in FD00 and then a double colon. And click Next. On the Add Exclusions, we are going to simply type in 0:0:0:1 and then click Add. That is going to add an exclusion for a single address. We'll click Next. On the scope lease, let's answer our fifth question. What is the preferred lifetime for a DHCP lease? Well, you can see that it's the same as when we created our IPv4 scope, 8 days. We'll click Next and Finish. And with that, we have created an IPv6 scope. My students should go ahead and expand that scope and take a screenshot. And here again, make sure it's a full screenshot and paste that into step number 9 in our second exercise. Let's go ahead and we're going to select Scope Options. Then we're going to right-click Scope Options and say Configure Options. Let's answer our sixth question. Which option is the DNS recursive name server IPv6 address list? Well, it's right there on your screen. Option 00023. Let's put a check mark there, and then we're going to add a new IPv6 address. And that is going to be FD:0:0:0:0:0:1. We're going to click Add. It's going to check. It couldn't find it. We're going to go ahead and we're going to still click Yes. And let's answer our seventh question. Where did that FD:0:0:0:0:0:1 come from? Well, if you remember, that was the IPv6 address we manually assigned to the DHCP server. There's your answer. I'd like my students to go ahead and take a screenshot before they close their scope options and paste that into step number 14. Okay, now we're done with our second exercise. Let's go ahead and we're going to move on to our third exercise, which is how do we go about creating and configuring a superscope. We're going to create a superscope out of two normal DHCP scopes. Understand that a superscope is the grouping of multiple scopes into a single administrative entry. And by using superscopes, you can support larger subnets. It shouldn't take very long. We're going to do this under IPv4, so we're going to right-click the IPv4 node, and we're going to choose New Scope. We're going to click Next, and for that scope name, we're going to simply use Scope 1, all one word. We'll click Next, and for the address range we're going to use, it's going to be 172.24.20.50, and the end IP address will be 172.24.50.240. Oh, I missed type there. Let's change that. 20.240. For the subnet mask, we're going to modify this to a class C to 255.255.255.0. We'll click Next. We're not going to do any exclusions, so we'll simply click Next. For the lease duration, we're going to modify that to 3 days. We'll go ahead and we'll click Next. On Configure Options, we're going to click Next. We're going to add a default gateway of 172.24.20.20, and we'll click Add. We'll then click Next. On our domain name and DNS servers, we'll accept that and click Next. Win servers is going to stay empty. We click Next. On the Activate Scope, we click Next, and finally Finish. What we're going to do is we're going to add an additional scope, and it's going to be Scope 2. So I'm going to right-click, New Scope, Next, Scope 2, Next, and the address range for this is going to be very similar, but it's going to be on .21 instead of .20. So 172.24.21.50, ending with 172.24.21.240. Here again, we're going to modify our subnet mask to be a class C. Everything looks good. 172, yep. We're looking good. Okay, next. No exclusions. We click Next. We're going to modify that lease duration to 3 days again. We're going to click Next. We're going to set our options. We're going to add very similar gateway, except this will be on that .21. So .24, .21, .20, and add. We'll then click Next. Keep the domain name and DNS server, Next. No Win server, Next. Activate scope, Next. And finish. We've created 2 scopes managing subnets. Let's go ahead. We're going to right click our IPv4 node once more, and we're going to select New Superscope. On our wizard, we click Next. Let's give it a name. We're going to call it Super 1. We click Next. Now, we need to select multiple scopes to include. Hold down the Control button, that's the CTRL key on your keyboard, and select Scope 1 and Scope 2. Holding Control allows you to select multiple items. We're going to click Next and Finish. Now it's merged those 2 scopes into one entry that we can manage. I'd like my students to go ahead and take a screenshot and paste this into step number 34. Let's go ahead and we're going to right click on Superscope Super 1 and display statistics. With this statistics open, let's answer question number 8. How many addresses are available for the Superscope? Well, in managing this Superscope, you can hand out a total of 382 IP addresses. There's your answer for question 8. It's just that easy. By utilizing a Superscope, you can see an overview of how your scopes are being allocated. We're done with our 3rd exercise. Let's move on to our 4th exercise, which is creating and configuring multicast scopes. We're going to create a multicast scope. Understand in DHCP multicast scopes, which are commonly known as Multicast Address Dynamic Client Allocation Protocol, MADCAP scopes. Another acronym. Great, that's a great acronym, isn't it? MADCAP. Gotta love that. These allow applications to reserve a multicast IP address for data and content delivery. For applications which use multicasting request addresses from the scopes, those applications need to support the MADCAP Application Programming Interface, API. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use IPv4 again. We're going to right click that IPv4 node and we're going to select New Multicast Scope. On our wizard screen, we'll click Next and we're going to type in Multicast Scope 1. We'll click Next, and in our IP address range, our starting IP address range is going to be 224.0.0.0, and we're going to end with 224.255.255.255. Let's answer our 8th question. To which class are multicast scopes assigned? Well, this goes back to our networking class, doesn't it? Well, we know the ranges that are available for Class A and Class B and Class C. Where does Class D start? Yeah, right here. This is a Class D range. Your answer for question 9 is Class D. Let's go ahead and click Next. On Exclusions, we'll click Next. On our lease duration, we can see that it's already assigned to be 30 days. That's going to be our 10th question. What is the default lease duration? Yes, 30 days. We're going to click Next. On the Activate Multicast Scope, we will click Next and Finish. Creating our multicast scope was just that easy. Let's go ahead and we're going to select that. We can expand it. And I'm going to select address pool. I'd like our students to go ahead and take another screenshot and paste that into step number 10. And with that, our fourth exercise is done. We're rolling right through this lab. The next exercise in our worksheet is exercise 4.5, creating a DHCP reservation. But we're going to skip ahead to our lab challenge, because in that lab challenge, we're going to create a DHCP scope that we're actually going to utilize within this exercise 4.5, creating DHCP reservation. So let's move on to our lab challenge. In our lab challenge, we're going to be creating a DHCP policy. By using DHCP policies, you can give granular control over scopes to allow you to assign different IP addresses or different options based on the device type or its role. Policies are applicable for a specific scope with a defined processing order. The options can be configured at the scope or inherited from server-wide policies. So on our DHCP console, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right-click IPv4 once more, and we're going to select New Scope. On our wizard screen, we click Next. We're going to name this scope Normal Scope, and click Next. It's all one phrase. For our address range, we're going to utilize 172.24.25.50, and our ending address will be 172.24.25.200. For our subnet mask, here again, we're going to modify this to a Class C. Oops. Click Next. On our exclusions and delays, we simply click Next. Lease duration, we're going to leave it the way it is. We're going to click Next. We're going to go ahead and configure some DHCP options. We click Next. We're going to assign a fictional router. It's a 172.24.25.20. And we're going to click Add, and then Next. We're going to accept the domain name and DNS server. We'll click Next. Here again, no Win servers. Click Next. Activate, yes, Next, and Finish. Now, in our IPv4 node, let's right-click, and we're going to go down and we're going to select Define Vendor Classes. In the DHCP Vendor Classes dialog box, we're going to select Add. And we're going to use a display name of Nortel Phones. And for a description, we're going to simply call it a desk phone. Under the ASCII 2 field, we're going to click in that area. You can see your cursor appears. We're going to type in Nortel-I, a space, 2004 -A. It should look just like this. If you've got that in there, go ahead and click OK. You can see we've added a new vendor class. We can go ahead and we can close. Now, where's that normal scope at? Well, it's right here at the top. Let's go ahead and expand that. We select policies, and before we create a new policy, let's go ahead and answer our 12th question, and that is, where do you define a DHCP policy? There's actually more than one place. We can see that we can define a policy here within an individual scope. But if I select the IPv4 node with a left click, I can specify a policy here under my actual scope node. So you can have a policy that would affect all. I'm going to right click within my normal scope. We're going to create a new policy. We're going to name that policy Policy 1. We'll click Next. And for the conditions, we're going to add a new condition. Under that Add Edit Condition dialog box, we're going to select the following. Vendor class equals, we're going to click our drop down right here under Values, and we're going to select the Nortel phones. We'll then click Add. We can see it's been added in here. We will then click OK. We have now added a condition. We can now click Next, and we need to define the range of addresses that this is going to apply to. Remember that our normal scope had a range from .50 to 200. This range is going to be 172.24.25.50 to 172.24.25.99. Only part of the scope is going to be allocated for the Nortel phones. We'll click Next. Under the standard options, we're going to go ahead and we'll click Next. If you needed any specific options, you could define them here. On the summary page, we'll click Finish, and we have now created a policy for our normal scope. Let's go ahead and right click that Policy 1, and we're going to go to Properties. And let's put a check mark on Set Lease Duration for the policy. We're going to change that from 8 days to 7 days. Now, before we click OK, my students should go ahead and take a screenshot, and you're going to paste that into step number 31. Got that? All right. Okay, so we've created our policy. Let's now go back to our fifth exercise, which was creating a DHCP reservation. We're going to do that utilizing the normal scope. DHCP client reservations allow administrators to reserve an IP address for permanent use by a DHCP client. By using reservations, you can ensure that the host will always have the same IP address. As with any other lease, when a client receives a reserved address, the client also receives all assigned options, such as the address of the default gateway and DNS servers. If these options are changed, they are automatically updated on the client when the lease is renewed. And remember that renewal typically happens at 50% of the lease duration. Within our normal scope, we're going to go ahead and we're going to select reservations. We're going to right-click reservations and say New Reservation. Now, with that open, let's go ahead and answer our 11th question. Which two reservation types are supported? Well, right here. There are two types listed, DHCP and BootP. There's your answer, question 11. For the reservation name, let's name it PC1. And the IP address is going to be 214 within that range. Our MAC address, we have to define the machine address of the adapter. This is how it keeps it assigned. And that's going to be E069.956 EE51A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Remember, MAC addresses are 48 bits represented by 12 hexadecimal characters. We can go ahead, we can click Add, and then Close. We can now see our DHCP reservation. I'd like my students to go ahead and take a screenshot, paste that into step number 7, and our exercise is done. Our lab is done. We've created multiple scopes, we've created superscopes, we've created a multicast scope, we created a policy, and we learned how to create reservations. I hope you enjoyed this lab. I know I enjoyed presenting it to you. If you like these labs, please click subscribe, and as I tell my students and my viewers, I hope to see you in the next lab or lesson. Take it easy, everybody.